Mansfield.
Ooh, I'd better get this done quickly as Half-Life had its 10th anniversary on November 19th, 2023. No, wait, 20th anniversary, 25th. Crud. So, time might hate us all, but I don't hate Half-Life. Valve, yes, that was at one time a game development studio, made quite the splash with its first game, and it's a title that has a very special place in my dried out, crusty old heart. It was some point in 1998, the exact time eludes me, but somewhere in the midst of those 12 months, I got my first PC. I mean, I'd had an Amiga almost a decade at that point, so technically I had a personal computer, but this was the first IBM PC compatible in the life of Bransfield. I think it had an AMD K62333 processor, and it didn't come with one, but at some point I picked up a Voodoo 2 graphics card. Maybe 12 megabytes? Who knows? Point being, I got my PC, then one of the best games ever made came out not long afterwards. Yep, Grim Fandango. A few weeks after LucasArts killed its own love for the adventure genre by making one of the greatest things that's ever been made though, Half-Life hit. But what, in the name of Gaben, did Half-Life actually do for gaming? What was it that made it such a game changer, a bar raiser? A thing what done that stuff people done do talk about still 25 years later? What the hell even was Half-Life? Well, to find that out, you probably want to watch the 25th anniversary documentary over on Valve's YouTube channel. But for my take on Half-Life, the game was... obviously... Games happened before Half-Life, and games happened after it, difficult as that might be to believe. Nevertheless, this was flat out, straight up, no bullcruddery, an absolute banger of a game from day one. The first-person shooter was established as a genre, and by 1998 we had us a wealth of options to choose from. Quake and Duke Nukem 3D had broken my brain a couple of years prior. I was enamoured with the demo of Sin I'd grabbed, probably from PC Gamer. Trespasser had already tried to change all of gaming forever, but failed on account of it being god-awful, despite what modern reappraisals would have you think. We had a lot of options. We weren't starved for choice. The original Unreal was 1998. Thief: The Dark Project hit not long after Half-Life. The original Rainbow Six was 1998 too. Good crikey, what a year for first-person titles it was. Plus GoldenEye was already out on the N64, Blood, Hexen, the, Life Force Tenka, loads of games. And despite all of that, Half-Life stormed in and wiped the floor with the competition. It was a confident, stylish, and decidedly, mature take on a genre that was, a lot of the time, bogged down by ultra-violence and action hero nonsense presented for the sake of it. Half-Life still provided all the guts and gore you could ask for, but wrapped it up in a much more believable, realistic representation of the world. Well, if your standards for believable include all that theoretical physics-based interdimensional alien-blasting sci-fi stuff, at least. But it was a step up and a step forward, and Valve made a real effort to ground its science fiction in the realms of something a bit more believable than what we were getting elsewhere. There was a harmony to the world. It held together. It was something the devs wanted to point out to you to make you realize this was a game doing things differently. I actually still remember a bit in Half-Life's manual boasting about weapons not floating in the air. In fact, I'm just going to use this internet thing to find it. Ah, this. You won't find Half-Life's arsenal spinning around in space. Instead, you'll find items in more realistic locations, such as on gun racks in the hands of your allies or on the bodies of your dead enemies. Similarly, ammo will be strewn around on the ground, hidden in crates and locked inside storage cages. It sounds so daft today, but that was legitimately a thing to boast about for Valve. Weapons were where you would expect to find them, physics applied to the world you were in. Not everyone you encountered was an enemy. It all added up and layered a splodge of special sauce on top of what was, at its core, a fundamentally solid, exciting, and well-designed shooter. Because if that bit, the core shooty blasting, if that didn't work well, then Half-Life would have ended up the same as any number of other FPSs from the era that we've all forgotten existed, like, Life Force Tanker. But the adventures of goateed nerd Gordon Freeman did work well. It controlled tightly, the world made sense and reacted largely how you'd expect it to. The challenges in your way were a mix of straight-up blasting and a few puzzles to tickle the grey matter. The selection of weapons was superb, with one of gaming's true great shotguns in the mix. Levels were diverse and interesting, progressing and developing as you went along. And it all so nearly wasn't. It's one of my favourite things about Half-Life. Valve had made a large amount of the game, but on putting it all together realised it just wasn't going to move the needle. As former Valver and writer-man Mark Laidlaw said to, well, me, when I did a feature on Half-Life for Retro Gamer magazine a million years ago, we felt keenly that we couldn't build another game that was largely corridors with monster closets. Games like Unreal and Sin were scary competitors, and we decided that if we were to stand a chance of standing out, we had better improve our process and reinvent our game. So a bunch of us closeted ourselves and redesigned the game from scratch. It incorporated huge chunks of what we had already built, but we thought through every inch of the game in great detail as a group, rather than simply assigning levels to level designers and letting them work in isolation. The influence of Quake and Duke Nukem 3D was all over the initial design for Half-Life, understandably given the level designers cut their teeth on those games, and Doom. Corridor shooting, monster closets, the interactivity of Duke's world, it was all pretty clearly there. But it was in that stopping and taking stock, going back and redoing everything from scratch to make absolutely sure it wasn't just yet another shooter. It served the game well, and that, in turn, served something else well, something almost as important to Half-Life as its core gamey bit. That being... It's a funny feeling to play through Half-Life even today and take in that story. It has interdimensional aliens, a military cover-up, conspiracies, ninjas, and plenty of sci-fi technobabble. It's silly and light and sort of pulpy in its sensibilities, but it still takes up residence alongside all the other games with good stories because it's presented so well and carried out with such confidence in the material. Admittedly, that's more of a comment on most other games being bilge in the story department than it is Half-Life being master of the theatrical domain, but hey. That thing that carried it all from start to finish was Valve's decision to get rid of cutscenes, making the story something you played through, with everything that happening to you. You were spoken directly to. You could run about while important scenes were taking place. You could be looking in the wrong direction when something major occurred. It brought you into the tale like few other games before had managed by very literally making you, the player, a part of the story. And that fact feeds into something that's always really been my favourite thing. It's your fault. Okay, so neither you, the player, nor our bearded science man main character Gordon were the controlling forces behind the secretive literal underground research going on at the Black Mesa facility. But it's you, the player, controlling our Gordy that pushes the sample into the antimatter spectrometer and brings about everything. Rips between dimensions, apparent alien invasions, the military cleanup that comes as a result, none of it would have happened if you, the player, controlling Beardy McScience, hadn't trundled that little trolley into the energy beams. It's great. And while I've never been entirely sold on Half-Life being home to a truly brilliant story, it was another area in which that grounded approach factored in. Bombast was limited, melodrama all but avoided. Situations unfolded and responses were realistic. There's been a disaster at the facility. Gordon, you've got a protective suit, meaning you're the most likely to be able to get to the surface and call for help. Oh, the military are coming and will surely help us, so I shall run towards them and oh wait, no, they're shooting me. Hey, this Freeman guy is bollocking up our military cleanup operation, begin hunting him down and kill his balls off. Hey, look now, you're on an alien world and it's crap. It all flows, it moves from one to the next with a level of logic behind it and, again, everything happening through your eyes at your own pace made for a narrative experience that felt believable. There were few leaps in logic or huge double crosses or any of that melodramatic garbage because you were seeing everything happening. The cheap tricks to ramp up the drama couldn't be used, or were at least harder to use. It made sense, it felt grounded, and it all blended together to make for... When you brought together those two previous elements, the core game and the story backing it all up, then mixed it in with the overall setting and tone of Half-Life, you landed on what it was that made people stick around, and what made the game stick around in our brains. The atmosphere. I was trying to build up to that as a reveal, but I do realise it already said an atmosphere on screen here, so I ballsed that up. Unless you weren't looking or are unable to see the screen, in which case the plan went perfectly and I shouldn't be saying this out loud. Anyway, Half-Life was just riddled with atmosphere. The fact that everything about it was, to use the word again, believable, and once again with the caveat of it being a mega sci-fi nerdfest full of blasty hand cannons and a mute physicist with a goatee who's also an action hero, the fact that it was believable in its setting, the fact that its story was something a bit more grounded and undergrounded than we were seeing elsewhere, the fact that you started the bloody game on a purpose-built transit system you and hundreds of other employees used to get to work, it was a complete vision. It's another one of those things that's pretty quaint by modern standards, how there's a lived-in world around you that you only see glimpses of, how the sound design is sparse and sparing to draw you in before going loud or making you jump out of your chair when another of those little turkey bastards gets you while crawling through an air vent. It's not that it was specifically new, but the skill with which Valve weaved such a rich tapestry of bits and pieces was an absolute smack around the face for the gaming public back in 1998. We were getting there elsewhere. I mentioned before all those other first-person shooters and first-person adjacent games released before or not long after Half-Life, including Life Force Tenka, but it was Valve's game that formalized, set the standard that became the new flag bearer for an entire genre. And I'd argue for gaming as a whole. A sense of place, a sense of purpose, a sense of fear and exhilaration, and of whatever else the developers wanted to make you feel. It was all there, and it was all handled effectively. But did those elements make Half-Life, well? I've talked a lot here about the great things Half-Life did, and yeah, I'm not going back on any of that. It was great, it is great, it changed things for the better, and I love it dearly. But there might be some consternation in the viewing public here in that I seem to be intimating Half-Life was the first to do all these things what it did done. It was not. I'm sure it had some firsts, but really in the most part it cribbed the best and most progressive elements from elsewhere and bundled them together into one superb package. See, Half-Life is one of those examples of a game that did things to change pretty much everything forever. These things might not necessarily be the first examples of those things being done, but in doing those things that were being done in a game that had so many eyeballs on it and had so much attention thrown its way, Half-Life couldn't help but become the de facto originator. It's happened loads before. Operation Winback was the game that introduced the modern version of sticky cover we all know and endure today, but Gears of War was the thing that made it popular. Moral choices probably came about thanks to I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, but everybody looks to something like Deus Ex or Fable or maybe even Black and White as the games that kicked the concept off. What I'm saying is, nobody gives a toss about who was first. just who did it best. So that realistic world, we'd seen it elsewhere, like in the direct inspiration Duke Nukem 3D, but Half-Life was such a consistent and believable world, apart from Zen, that you were utterly drawn into it. That thrilling gunplay, those environmental puzzles, that terrible platforming, all been done before. But Half-Life did it in a profoundly thrilling way, in environments that made sense with some of the best of the terrible platforming. Mods! Doom put them on the map, but Half-Life's approach to modding came direct from a team that itself had largely started out in the mod community, and this far more forward-thinking approach ended up giving us things like They Hunger, Team Fortress Classic, and Counter-Strike. And, like I said, the game had some firsts of its own. Now, other games might have offered this as an option, and I know players were already customizing their control schemes to operate in this way, but Half-Life was the first major title to use the WASD control scheme by default. It made you play an FPS how we still do today. Well, how you still do today, because I tend to use a controller. Which made Valve's 25th anniversary update for Half-Life all the more appreciated, given it now finally has proper baked-in controller support. But even if Half-Life wasn't strictly the first to do all its greatness, it didn't matter. None of that worked against it. It was well received immediately, loved instantly, and recognised as a great in its time and well beyond, which inevitably led to because Half-Life did do the things what it did do with such diddly daring do, and because it sold so many copies and made so much money, the game became the thing to emulate, to crib from, to entirely rip off. Look at the things that became commonplace in gaming since November of 1998. Motifs, themes, mechanics, whatever. So very many games have adopted the scenic tour introductory sequence that Half-Life made so important to setting its scene. BioShock, Halo 2, Batman Arkham City, Dishonored, Skyrim, and so many more. They all riffed on that opening ride used to show you a world, to hint at what's to come, and to set up an atmosphere while also allowing the player some level of control over things. Tally up how many games introduced a usually benign tool and turned it into your first weapon, a crowbar, a wrench, what you think is a laser blaster but is actually a bit of kit for your mining expedition. I'm talking about Dead Space there, but just realised it covers Starfield too, and probably a million other things. And prepare to lose count at how many games adopted the storytelling practice of just letting everything play out in-game without those immersion-breaking cutscenes jarring you out and back into the action at a moment's notice. Sure, things have since moved on and developed. There seems to be a healthy mix of cutscenes and the Half-Life approach in games these days. Think of, say, The Last of Us. It's been refined, but it was that shift in perspective, literal and figurative, that knocked us down the path we've been travelling for a quarter of a century. The influence of Half-Life cannot be denied. Its legacy is one of a genre changed and an industry that realised it had to go back and up its game if it wanted to compete. I can see in recent years that influence has finally started to wane. The rise of the boomer shooter, of people harking back to a time just before Valve's first game arrived on the scene, says to me that there's been a definite swing back towards those big dumb fun games we all enjoyed before Freeman's Fun Times. But realise that's not a negative or a criticism. I'm saying the direction of video games in the past 25 years has been guided in a big way by one debut title from an unproven group of wannabe game developers. That's a decent bloody effort and one hell of a legacy for a game to leave behind it. The flip side of all this, of course, is that Gearbox Software got their start making add-on packs for Half-Life, Blue Shift and Opposing Force. The success of those expansions meant we've had to put up with one Randall Pitchfork for almost a quarter of a century now. That's not a legacy to be proud of when you think about it. Still, not even the magician with a particular taste in porn, allegedly, being thrust down our gullets, phrasing, for nearly 25 years is enough to ruin Half-Life. It was a focused, dedicated attempt to raise the bar for first-person shooters, for all of gaming as we knew it. Half-Life was a statement, a line in the sand that said, we can do better, and we can be better, and we can include a really ruddy, great shotgun too. Half-Life was Valve shooting its shot. And you know what? I think they pulled it off. Thanks for watching, and thanks to this list of patrons on Patreon who Patreonize me frequently. Join them via the link below. I'm off to play Half-Life 2 Episode 2 on my Steam Deck instead of playing anything that came out in the last 15 years because I am a goon. Bye!